This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with the run through the markets though. With today's gain, the JSE All Share has risen by 5.7% in the last 4 weeks. This is the third consecutive day of gains for the All Share and the top 40. MTN was a particularly strong performer. It was up by over 10% on the day, but on a year-to-date basis, it's still 31% in the red. Nigerian equities are continuing this steady upward recovery in the second quarter. That brings the rise so far to just under 15%. Kenya's main index back over 2,000 points today after marginal gain. It's been pretty flat though over the last month, rising by barely 1%. But we'll be taking a look at the outlook for the region's biggest listed firm, Jubilee, in just a moment. Here's what's coming up tonight. With nearly 9,000 cases of COVID-19 in Eastern Africa, we'll take a look at how medical insurance companies are navigating their way through this crisis. Germany and France agree on a €500 billion recovery fund for European economies. And we look at a South African app that's helping Zimbabweans send food home amidst this worldwide pandemic. All that and more is coming up in the course of the hour. But let's start in the medical insurance space in East Africa. The region has about 9,000 COVID-19 cases at the moment. 13% of those are in Kenya and Uganda. Even as the pandemic continues to spread, the region's biggest medical insurance firm is still negotiating with reinsurers to take on some of the costs involved in dealing with this pandemic. Their refusal to do so far leaves insurance companies in a situation where they either cover the cost of most of the treatment and testing themselves or simply choose not to cover COVID-19 cases at all. A few hours ago, I spoke to the chair of the Jubilee Insurance Group, Nizar Juma, about how the firm is responding to this pandemic. Jubilee is East Africa's largest insurance firm. Our conversation started with him pointing out that this pandemic has dramatically cut hospital visits.
Initially, what's happened in the month of April, for example, is that we've had a lot of people who would normally use the hospitals or the facilities have cut down. Very, very few people are going into hospitals. They've stopped all elective surgery and elective treatments. And so the result is that there is a drop of anywhere between 30 and 50% of the normal usage by our insurers. Although we see that this is going to be temporary and the pent-up demand will eventually catch up in another 2 or 3 months.
Walk us through your thought process when it came to the decision on whether or not to cover COVID-19 related cases. Kenya has only about 900 or so at the moment, but in a worst case scenario, say we have 10,000 to 20,000 of these cases, inevitably some of that would come into your portfolio. Are you covering those cases, and how did you arrive at the decision to do so?
Yes. Now, as soon as WHO declared this as a pandemic, all our reinsurers then backed away and said we cannot cover this anymore. Now, all insurers without the backing of the reinsurers find it impossible then to hold cover. However, the reinsurers accepted to hold cover in Uganda because the regime there took action very quickly. They put everybody under lockdown, very strict regime, and so they decided to hold cover in Uganda. So even today in Uganda, we are holding all our customers covered against this pandemic. In Kenya, however, some of the reinsurers agreed to cover and some did not. And so we are in a very difficult position in that we cannot really hold cover and we are still talking with the reinsurers that have not agreed to hold cover to try and persuade them to hold cover. Even the regulator is trying to persuade them. So in the meantime, what we have done is told all our insured that we will hold you cover until you have been tested positive. But I think that things will change. We are hoping that they will change in the next days or weeks.
Earlier when this pandemic initially emerged, I would understand where the reinsurers are coming from, because we don't know at the time anyway how this disease would evolve, how it would affect the body, what sort of costs you would incur. But 3 months, 6 months down the line, I mean, surely we've got a bit more information on how to respond to the symptoms, the sort of treatment people require. Are reinsurers still uncertain about what costs they would incur, even with all the new information we have around COVID-19?
I think it's partly that, and partly, some of them are just sticking to the law and said because it's been declared a pandemic, we are not obliged to hold cover. And I think that, for example, Jubilee Insurance may then be forced with a few reinsurers holding cover that we might agree to do an ex gratia cover for the others. But anyway, this is something our board is now debating, and we will be able to know. And you rightly say that the reinsurers may also change their attitude once they know the extent to which they will become liable.
Part of my conversation with the Jubilee Group chair there. But of course, you're going to ask, why does any of this matter? Well, as far as the Kenyan context is concerned, even before COVID-19 hit, the private medical insurance sector here was in deep financial trouble. Of the 23 companies that operate in that space, barely 30% of them made any underwriting profit. Put another way, they were spending more on paying medical bills than they were actually receiving in premiums. That's not sustainable. It's a recipe for insolvency and eventually bankruptcy. As the largest firm in this space, Jubilee took in about 17% of all medical insurance premiums in Kenya in 2018, roughly $35 million worth. It reported an underwriting profit of $7.1 million, in contrast to the combined sector underwriting loss of just over $10 million. On to Zimbabwe now. New $10 banknotes have started to circulate in the country's capital, Harare. It's part of efforts by monetary authorities over there to try and ease a crippling cash shortage while keeping up with soaring inflation that was over 670% in the month of March. CGTN's Farai Mokutuya filed this report.
Security guard Nomo Chigweremba has finished his night shift and should be heading home to rest, but instead has to queue at the bank for cash. He hopes the introduction of new notes, accompanied by an increase in the withdrawal limits, will bring an end to the struggle.
There will be shorter queues, especially if they continue allowing withdrawals of 500 per day, because most people don't have much money in their accounts, so they will make fewer trips to the bank.
Like many in this queue, No More is forced to look for cash because some businesses have different prices depending on the mode of payment. Electronic payments attract a premium. A new $20 bill will join the $10 note in the first week of June as part of measures to ease the cash crunch. Their velocity of circulation is likely to be slowed down because under the current lockdown, most informal businesses that normally demand hard cash are closed. And there are also fears that the notes themselves could transmit the virus. The subdued demand should ensure that there's enough to go around for everyone. However, previous injections of new currency have seen temporary relief because once out of the banks, the money ends up in the informal sector.
It's mostly us, the formally employed people, who keep the money in circulation. Most people take it into the black market.
There, it is used in illegal foreign currency trading, which authorities blame for stoking inflation, and not the addition of new notes, which they say are simply replacing electronic bank balances.
I would expect that there will be inflation driven primarily by expectations of inflation, driven also mainly by expectations of a depreciation in the exchange rate. this depreciation being driven by the history that anytime we think something is happening through the printing of money, then those who sell money on the parallel market will immediately increase rates.
Despite efforts to clamp down on it, a parallel foreign currency market where the Zimbabwe dollar is trading at less than half its official value continues to operate. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
This COVID-19 pandemic is hindering Egypt's plan to reduce the country's unemployment rate. The country's reported a rise in unemployment for the first quarter of 2020. It now stands at about 9.2%, up from 7.7% in the prior reading. Here's CGTN's Adel El-Marouki with the details.
Until mid-March, Egypt's unemployment rates had been steadily dropping. But from March 17, the COVID-19 pandemic began casting its shadows over the North African nation's economy. In just a few weeks, unemployment spiked to 9.2% from 7.7%.
Before the pandemic, Egypt was moving well in dropping unemployment rates. The latest report showed it went down to 7.7% from 8.1% quarter to quarter. But now, the pandemic is slowing down the economy and production power. Some industries have also been completely frozen.
Egypt has shut education facilities, theaters and cafes. Aviation and tourism are frozen. In-house dining has been banned in all restaurants. Their repercussions have extended to all other industries.
Compared to the global projections issued by international financial institutions, Egypt is well absorbing the pandemic shock. Governmental and non-governmental and private bodies are all collaborating to issue financial support to irregular labor. The central bank is restructuring their debt. The government has been on track to take preemptive measures to diminish the economic impact of the pandemic.
Government has banned layoffs in sectors like tourism and aviation. In return, it's pouring some $6.2 billion to support the most vulnerable individuals and industries. Almost all fields in Egypt have reported layoffs or salary cuts of up to 50% or both. Egypt's workforce has some 29 million citizens. Analysts are expecting up to 20% of unemployment rates if the pandemic's impact stretched to the end of the year. It could get worse when Egyptian expatriates lose their job and return home. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
We'll run through some company news now. Let's start in aviation. 3 unions that are representing more than 60% employees at South African Airways are calling for an investigation into the carrier's business rescue operation. These are the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, the South African Cabin Crew Association and the SAA Pilots Association. They've also called on the protectioners not to continue with an appeal against a recent Labour Court ruling that their retrenchment process was essentially unfair. Elsewhere, loss-making Thai Airways has been allowed to restructure its debt load in order to keep its aircraft in the sky. The struggling airline had previously asked for a government bailout of about $1.8 billion. Thai Airways was under financial pressure even before this pandemic, and that caused, of course, passenger numbers to plummet steeply around the world. In 2019, this carrier reported losses of over $370 million. Tesla is raising the price of its self-driving option on its electric vehicles worldwide, starting with a $1,000 hike. The company's CEO, Elon Musk, tweeted that the price will continue to rise as the technology involved improves. This comes as Musk is battling with officials in California over the restarting of its US car assembly plant in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. The self-driving option will now cost $8,000 and the price rise kicks in on the 1st of July. And finally, investors and other demonstrators have gathered at Shell's headquarters in the Netherlands to press the oil giant for more concrete action to reduce its environmental footprint, as well as to meet the Paris climate goals. Several Shell petrol stations have been reportedly blocked in the morning to prevent clients from buying fuel. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up. Uber plans to cut a further 3,000 jobs as it battles the effects of this coronavirus pandemic. And Egypt's government will provide $6 billion in loan guarantees to banks in order to help struggling enterprises. The details are coming up shortly.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sue Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's look at the intersection of tech and this pandemic. The global ride-hailing company Uber is set to cut another 3,000 jobs and close dozens of offices. This is all part of a series of measures that are being implemented to boost the business, which has been gutted by this pandemic. The latest round of job cuts follows another dismissal of 3,700 employees earlier in May, with reductions now representing roughly 25% of the total workforce. Uber will also stop a range of side projects that it's been running as it focuses essentially on its two core enterprises, ride-hailing, which we know it for, and food delivery through the Uber Eats app. Now, the announcement by the firm, so its shares rise by as much as 3% in trading. As a result of these changes, Uber will incur anywhere between $175 million to $220 million in charges. The bulk of that will come in the second quarter. So how exactly is the ride-hailing sector here in Kenya coping with the economic damage being inflicted by COVID-19? Let's find out. Olaoluwa Akinusi is the Kenya country manager for Bolt, who joins me now live via Skype. So since Kenya reported its first COVID-19 case in the middle of March, what changes have you seen in not just ride-hailing traffic, but also the number of drivers who are active on the platform?
Okay, thanks for having me, Ramah. I think I would start by saying we have, as across the Kenyan market, we have witnessed the different guidelines that the government has put in place in a bid towards flattening the curve, in a bid towards mitigating the spread of the virus. And some of those guidelines include the limitation of number of people that move around, the curfews, and then of course other major guidelines like limitations to people that go in and out of the country or even move within the country. All of these have, of course, significantly impacted business, as you see less and less people moving up and down. And the ride-hailing industry is also not spared in this particular kind of scenario.
So what sort of traffic decline are you seeing? Are we looking at a 30% fall in traffic, a 50% fall in traffic?
I mean, I'll just say it's significant in the sense that a part of the core of the business involves the moving of people up and down or within the country or within the city. And based on the restrictions to movement of people and even goods, then of course there would also have been that kind of impact that has had on the business across the different locations where we operate.
Right. So this curfew, of course, understandably is limited, as you point out, people's ability to move around the city. But based on what you're seeing from consumers as they cut spending, are they now at a point where they say, look, ride hailing is probably a non-essential service, so I'm not going to spend as much money on that?
Okay. Well, indeed, the behavior of consumers have significantly changed over the last couple of months. We've noticed that the way people or consumers interact with different businesses, even beyond the ride-hailing sector, has changed also over this period of time. So, I mean, what we have started to do over time, and what we would continue to do, is to try to remain innovative and ahead of things that are happening, to ensure that we're able to use our infrastructure, our technology, to adapt to the times and to create solutions that basically align with meeting the needs of riders and drivers that are within our community.
I was asking that with one specific thing in mind, because what we've seen in other markets is people start to get back into their normal routines, so to speak, is that we're trying to avoid public transportation, for instance. So in that instance, if you're looking at the displacement of demand, the demand for transportation is still there, but people are not going to be taking matatus as much. They might perhaps be switching over to ride-hailing services. Might that provide a lifeline for Bolt?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of what we're noticing. We know that people, in a bid to be more safe, and then also for the fact that they still have to move around, either people that offer essential services or businesses that still also have to move goods from one point to another, we see that they are adopting the new solutions that we have, or the new innovations that we have in the market, like the Bolt Protect innovation that we recently launched, that basically keeps the rider and the driver safe while they move within the city. And then also some other initiatives that we had put in place around basically solving the need of essential workers, or in another case, expectant mothers that need to move from their houses to their choice or their chosen places of healthcare provision, or their hospitals. And we basically put this in place to allow them to get free rides within the curfew hours. And I mean, this we see as a way to support or innovate towards adapting to the new realities that we find ourselves in.
Okay, you have prior experience in the e-commerce space. For the benefit of our viewers, you used to work for Jumia before you went over to Bolt. But to what extent can this pivot that we've seen into business deliveries, to what extent can that help to offset the income that you're losing through lower income, through lower frequency of trips and even shorter trips?
Okay, as an organization, Bolt Kenya continues to remain, how do I put it, attentive to changes that occur either within the consumer behavior segment or across the economy as a whole. So as I said earlier, it's just about us on continuing to remain innovative, continue to ensure that we're able to use our infrastructure, we're able to use the technology we have in place to meet the current needs per time, and ensure that the business itself has some good level of continuity. And then whatever kinds of products that we launch into the market as well also have direct impact on meeting the needs of the community of riders and drivers that we have.
Okay.
So I mean, it's pretty much been a good balance of us being able to use this technology, this infrastructure, to meet needs per time, regardless of the change in consumer behavior over the time.
All right, one last question for you in 30 seconds. There's a proposal in the 2020 finance bill that I'm sure you're aware of to impose a 1.5% tax on transactions made in online marketplaces. By definition, that would also affect you. If this proposal becomes law, A, how will it be implemented, and B, how will it affect your local operations?
I mean, it's yet to be communicated how the implementation is going to go. But as with every regulation or every bill that the government brings up, there's the standard understanding that the way it's going to be implemented is going to be shared with stakeholders. And fundamentally as well, there would be conversations around how the bill or the regulation is also going to affect businesses or impact the economy in positive ways. So these conversations are ongoing right now across different stakeholders within the country. And I believe at the end of the day, we would all be able to achieve a scenario where the regulations allow us or allow businesses within the sector, allow the government as well to be able to achieve growth of the economy and not stifle the growth of businesses within the economy.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Olaoluwa Akinusi, Kenya Country Manager for Bolt. Thank you very much for your time. Now let's move on to Egypt. The country's central bank will provide up to $6.4 billion in loan guarantees to banks in order to aid businesses during the coronavirus crisis. That decision comes during increased business risks right across the market, especially with regard to companies and finances. Now, the loans will carry an interest rate of roughly 8%. That's well below the central bank's key overnight lending rate of 9.25%. The coronavirus pandemic has wreaked absolute havoc on the North African economy, particularly with the virtual shutdown of the country's tourism industry, which represents roughly 5% of gross domestic product, and of course the closure of restaurants and cafes, which are vital in the country's broader tourism sector in the North African economy. Now, Egypt did start the week on a relatively high note after the World Bank offered a $50 million emergency response facility to help the country deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. That cash will all be dedicated towards the health sector in order to boost the country's response. CGTN's Adel Ehmarouki filed this report.
The World Bank is helping Egypt's COVID-19 emergency response plan. Its $50 million is part of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Development Association's Global Fast Track Facility. It aims to support vulnerable populations through economic and medical support.
The World Bank announced $6 billion in rapid financing to its member states. So the $50 million is basically Egypt's maximum share. The value doesn't reflect Egypt's financial needs to face the impact of the coronavirus pandemic.
Egypt will use this amount to develop its COVID-19 quarantine hospitals infrastructure. It'll also be used in training medical staff and expand services and preparedness in more hospitals.
The loan is purely for medical purposes, to enhance the government's medical capacity and capabilities. The $50 million are not enough, but if you add to them the state's $6.2 billion, which President El-Sisi allocated for the health sector, in addition to a new loan to be announced from the African Development Bank and the portion from the IMF, these funds can enrich Egypt's ability to face the pandemic.
The IMF has earlier approved a $2.7 billion rapid financing instrument to Egypt. Most of it is going to be used to cushion the balance of payments and support most vulnerable industries.
The World Bank's $50 million is the second facility Egypt receives to face the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. The authorities are in negotiations for a $5.6 billion standby arrangement from the IMF and another loan from the African Development Bank. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Guinea's partnered with the Chinese tech firm Huawei to boost technological developments amidst this pandemic. The country's president, Alpha Conde, called on his country's citizens to work remotely as much as they can in order to ensure continuity of professional services. Huawei is expected to expand the partnership to make the Guinean administration's digitization plan effective right across the country. In addition to this, it will also be investing in the transfer of skills by boosting development of Guinean talents. At the moment, Guinea has recorded more than 2,600 positive cases of COVID-19, 1,133 recoveries and 16 fatalities.
We have the capacity to provide the best technology to the Guinean people in terms of telecommunications. We can also provide a reliable and secure service because that is absolutely necessary when it comes to telecommunications. And during this pandemic period, for example, the government and the people have a much higher demand for internet and communication. And to do this, we need to ensure the security of the network.
This is a first in our country, and I would like to thank the government for this initiative. However, I must admit that I miss the solidarity and conviviality in which the Council of Ministers used to stand. I'm saddened and afraid. I would like all Guineans to know that COVID-19 is a reality. It's a complete change in our habits.
You're watching Global Business. Time for another break. Here's what's on the other side. Germany and France agreed to back a €500 billion recovery fund for EU economies. And Huawei is rejecting the United States' new restrictions on its acquisition of semiconductor products. All that and more is coming up shortly.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's recap the stories making your headlines at this hour. Some African countries are ordering consignments of Madagascar's purported cure for COVID-19. The World Health Organization has not endorsed the COVID organics herbal remedy, and it has cautioned against its use. The African Union and the WHO have called for clinical trials of this product. Rwanda's genocide fugitive Felicien Kabuga has appeared before a court in Paris following his capture earlier this week. The 84-year-old is accused of financing Hutu militias that massacred some 800,000 Tutsis and their moderate Hutu allies over a span of 100 days in 1994. And the US President Donald Trump has threatened to permanently pull funding from the World Health Organization. The decision is, however, dependent on the UN agency making major changes, as he sees it, in 30 days. In a letter to the fund, Mr. Trump says that the WHO has done a sad job in its response to the COVID-19 pandemic, adding that the organization ignored reports of the virus spreading in Wuhan. That's a run through your headlines. Right then, on to other matters now. Germany and France have jointly proposed a €500 billion recovery fund to support European economies that have been battered by COVID-19. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, and the French President, Emmanuel Macron, issued a joint statement on that fund on Monday. They say the money will be used to help sectors and regions that are particularly affected by the pandemic. Both leaders will take the proposal and seek agreement from other members of the EU. The funds will be provided as grants rather than loans. Repayments will be made from the EU budget in order to avoid increasing debt pressure on economies which are already weak before the pandemic. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has welcomed this idea. The head of the International Monetary Fund says that the global recovery could take longer than initially expected. The fund's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, adds that the fund is likely to revise lower its April forecast of a 3% contraction in economic output in 2020. That's attributed to a much bleaker economic picture pointed to by a whole range of data reports. The IMF is also likely to change its projection of a partial recovery of 5.8% GDP growth for next year. In addition to all of this, Georgieva raised concerns about protectionism in light of renewed tensions between the world's top two economies. The global lender warned last month that business closures and lockdowns to contain the virus would throw the world into the deepest recession we've seen since the Great Depression. Now, on the 1st of January this year, China's new foreign investment law came into effect. It replaces previous provisions and regulations, and the law has been widely seen as a move by China designed to further attract foreign capital. CGTN's Omar Khan explores it.
It's a new era for regulating foreign investment across the world's second largest economy. At the heart of China's new foreign investment law, providing a more level playing field for domestic and foreign firms. And though the ongoing coronavirus pandemic will continue to have unknown consequences for the global economy, the landmark legislation is expanding more areas for investment in China.
It allows for our market to be more and more open, alongside a quicker opening up process. Previously, certain areas were not open to foreign investment. Now, with the new law, it has become more accessible, except for the negative list. When foreign businesses come to China, they'll bring their own experiences and will benefit domestic enterprises. In fact, you may be at a disadvantage if you don't compete with them.
Zhu Leiyu, an NPC deputy and law firm director in the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou, also believes that the landscape for foreign investment in China has yet to reach its final stage.
I think the creation of the Guangdong Free Trade Zone is a good example promoting the implementation of the law. I think more FTZs can be set up nationwide, and the negative lists, I think, could be smaller and reduced so more industries can receive foreign investment. This will benefit the opening up process, promote economic development, and increase competition.
At the same time, the updated legislation aims to keep China as an attractive investment destination, while also addressing concerns raised by investors. Reducing red tape and improving the ease of doing business could help the nation rebound in the post-pandemic future.
One of the biggest improvements has been, and it's accelerated most recently, is the reducing the cumbersomeness, the bureaucratic cumbersomeness of registering a foreign invested enterprise. And that has been simplified a great deal. Intellectual property, trade secrets, notarizing and legalizing documents for judicial proceedings. It has many wonderful provisions that are steps in the right direction. But we haven't been able to see the fruits of all of that because of the present situation. But I think anyone who looked at it objectively would find it, and certainly our clients have found it when they looked at it, to be a positive step, very positive in the right direction.
Despite the welcomed progress, some legal experts, especially those providing legal and consulting services to potential foreign investors, say more fine-tuning could bring even more businesses to China.
For example, in the United States, if a Chinese entity comes and sets up a corporation in the United States, we don't call it a Chinese invested enterprise, we call it a company. And so there should be no differentiation between foreign companies and registered invested companies and Chinese companies. Now that doesn't mean that China can't restrict areas that it doesn't welcome foreign investment. It certainly has the right to do so. But in the areas that it permits it, there should be no differentiation between a foreign invested company and a Chinese company. And that's something that we should strive towards.
In the first quarter of this year, foreign investment into China fell by a staggering 10.8% compared to 2019, exposing the harsh effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Despite the significant transformation of how foreign investment is conducted in China, it may be quite some time before the real benefits are felt both by investors and the wider economy. Omar Khan, CGTN, Guangzhou.
The U.S. Department of Commerce is set to impose new restrictions on Huawei's acquisition of semiconductors from American chip makers. On Monday, the Chinese telecom giant slammed the decision. It said it's looking for a solution. It adds that it has been committed to complying with all U.S. government rules and regulations since last year when the tech giant was added to the entity list. Now, this new rule will affect communication services offered to more than 3 billion people who use Huawei products and services worldwide. At the moment, the Trump administration's new restrictions have not been fully implemented yet, with a buffer of about 120 days. Huawei is coordinating with chip suppliers and significantly increasing its funding into its research and development unit.
This action, this decision, is both arbitrary and pernicious and threatens to undermine the entire industry worldwide. The new rule will impact the expansion, maintenance and continuous operations of networks worth hundreds of billions of dollars that we have rolled out across more than 170 countries.
Our business will inevitably be massively impacted. But this past year of practice has given us a thick skin. We are confident that we can find a solution soon.
Now, a number of auto plants are restarting assembly lines in North America. Workers for the big three, Ford, General Motors and Fiat Chrysler automobiles, returned to facilities across the country. Other industries are also watching developments over there pretty closely. CGTN's Dan Williams filed this report from Chicago.
A new Ford Explorer dries off the production line at a Ford plant on the outskirts of Chicago. This factory is among a number of auto facilities to open again in the US, having closed in March due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But for the tens of thousands of workers returning to the various auto production lines, there were mixed emotions.
Well, I know personally 5 people that passed away from this. 4 of them worked here, 1 worked next door. So we're scared.
My wife's a nurse, my sons are cops. I'm ready. Let's go, let's get this done. We got to do it sooner or later.
It will still take time for the plants to ramp up to capacity. Some opened with just a single shift. New health and safety protocols have also been put in place in an attempt to lower the risk of an outbreak.
Everybody has to wear a face mask. Everybody's going to get mandatory temperature scans. They know that if there is an outbreak, if a couple people get infected, they'll be right back at square one. They'll have to shut down the plant. They'll have to quarantine the workers and disinfect everything. So they're taking that very seriously.
Another crucial element for automakers to navigate will be supply chains. One auto plant in Alabama that only reopened last month has been forced to pause production again because of supply issues, not because of the virus.
You have to remind people that putting together a car, you can't have 95% of the parts. You got to have all of the parts, and they have to be all in the right assembly plants and in the parts plants at the right time. Otherwise, you can't build a car.
This is a key time for US automakers and suppliers. The global pandemic has already caused significant damage to the industry, but companies hope reopening the plants will mark a major turning point.
Production ended very quickly. They're hoping production and demand for new vehicles, quite frankly, can resume pretty quickly. And they're hoping you're going to start to see demand. And again, you look to places like China, which was first hit and first to recover, and you started to see some green shoots there with demand returning, production returning, and these companies starting to bounce back.
Auto production is a key sign that the US economy is opening up once again. Other industries will be watching the industry closely. All will be desperately hoping there won't be a resurgence of infections. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
In Cuba, many businesses have shut down as part of broader measures to try and contain COVID-19. The country's reported over 1,800 positive cases so far. Here's CGTN's Luis Chirino with more.
Nuris Higueras is a successful Cuban entrepreneur who owns this restaurant, Atelier. Until very recently, the place was popular, full of clients enjoying high-quality food in the ambience of an old elegant mansion in downtown Havana. But business dried up virtually overnight as measures to contain spread of the coronavirus led to a drastic reduction of mass services, including the shutdown of businesses like Nuris Restaurant. CGTN paid a visit to the place to see how the new reality has impacted Nuris and her family.
Atelier is our family's restaurant, and this situation has affected us economically. We are now living on our own reserves, and although we help one another, we have been deeply affected.
Nuris told me that she is using her time to do general repairs in preparation for reopening once the country returns to normality. In the meantime, she's happy to dedicate more time to her family, particularly her 90-year-old grandmother.
For years, I had not dedicated her my time as I do now. I love to join her at breakfast and cook for her as she cooks for me as well, and I enjoy speaking with her and watching TV together.
Current protection measures provide that restaurants and cafeterias can either offer takeaway and delivery services or resort to a tax-exempt temporary close till the country's epidemiological conditions improve. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
Now, there is no doubt that film chains are among the most affected businesses by this particular pandemic. Authorities in China, however, are working to keep the sector alive, despite cinemas still remaining shut. The State Tax Administration has now exempted production houses from all value-added taxes for the whole year. CGTN's Chen Tong filed this report for What's Hot tonight.
Shanghai Film Group owns 61 cinemas nationwide, but they've all been shut for almost 4 months. And as a result, the group's profits fell by more than 250% year-on-year in the first quarter. But China's tax administration rode to the rescue, with its announcement that cinemas' value-added taxes would be forgiven for the entire year. That will help keep the Shanghai Film Group from an unhappy ending.
The shock from the pandemic on the film industry has been unprecedented. The whole industry came to a halt. All the companies are facing heavy financial pressure. But the exemption from VAT taxes is giving us important help. We should be able to save 3.5% of our box office earnings for this year.
Shanghai Film Group is hardly alone. The China Film Association says more than 40% of the cinemas it surveyed are facing the risk of permanent closure. Value-added taxes paid by cinemas are based on their box office earnings, and relief for that income will now go to the some 400 cinemas in Shanghai. There will be relief for some pre-virus earnings as well.
We'll return taxes to cinemas that made some money in January or before the policy was launched.
Entertainment companies have been suffering severely from the pandemic over the past few months. Cinemas were shut down and crews were suspended from shooting. In the first quarter of this year, 11 Asia-listed entertainment firms saw net profits drop by triple digits. Financing is what they need during an emergency. In addition to the tax breaks, the government has been helping in other ways too.
First-tier companies including Huawei Brothers, Wanda, and Alibaba have all had large capital investments this year. Huawei Brothers, for example, has even had investment from state-owned companies. That's good news for the whole film industry.
So national support has arrived, but still there are many challenges ahead. Even once the cinemas reopen, it's certain the audiences will be small at first. That will be especially hard on large companies like the Shanghai Film Group, which have always relied heavily on cinema ticket income. Everyone is looking for longer-term solutions of their own.
In addition to traditional cinema films, we'd like to explore more innovative solutions in the areas of film licensing, advertising, marketing, and production.
The latest fiscal reports of listed entertainment firms do show that those which have been able to produce internet dramas for the past few months are doing better. The Huawei Brothers accounting reports that one of its internet dramas has made more than 100 million yuan, while Huace Group saw net profits jump by triple digits in the first quarter thanks to its internet showings. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then a quick round of commodity prices for you. Crude essentially up at close to $35 a barrel. I thought we'd have seen that at least in the second quarter of the year. Palladium was one of the standout commodities of 2019. It crashed pretty heavily in the month of March, but the market seems to be piling back into it. Spot prices up 2.5% today. The metal is actually positive on a year-to-date basis, up by around 9.2%, just over $2,000 an ounce. But given how uncertain demand is for most metals, and it's relatively difficult to gauge where effective demand will be 3 months, much less 6 months from now, let's see how that price trend continues to play out. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at a South African app that's helping Zimbabweans send food home amidst this global pandemic. And online streaming services are getting a fair bit of attention amidst the pandemic in Ethiopia.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, with cross-border movement restricted because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Zimbabweans in South Africa are using an app to send food home to their relatives in their crisis-hit homeland. The app is named after a Ndebele word for the traditional way of sending goods over the border with bus and taxi drivers. Since the lockdowns were enforced in both countries, usage of this app has surged by 200%. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with the details on Grassroots tonight.
Zimbabweans living and working in South Africa have been paying bus drivers to ferry food to their relatives back home for decades. Today, this has become impossible under lockdowns in both countries to stem the spread of the coronavirus. But thanks to technology, Zimbabweans are able to receive groceries through an app called Malaicha.
The lockdown and the shutdown of the borders between South Africa and Zimbabwe forced Zimbabweans who would traditionally use the informal means of sending goods and groceries to Zimbabwe to use our service, to actually exploit, try it. So 200% increase in the number of orders processed. The number of unique customers sending those orders is slightly less than that. We saw a 100% increase in the number of unique customers. And obviously those customers enjoyed the service and sent more than just one transaction during the lockdown period.
Malaicha saw the use of its services surge by 200% month-on-month in April after borders closed under a nationwide lockdown. Customers make their orders via the app and the company delivers the goods in Zimbabwe, where it has stores of the items in warehouses. However, the app has yet to break even and needs to scale up its usage. Its journey to profitability will be longer than a typical startup due to high costs for things like warehousing.
With this lockdown, we are very busy because a lot of people in South Africa are depending on Malaicha to use Malaicha to send groceries to their relatives here. So it's busy. Every day it's busy.
It's busy. But the lockdown is helping. Previously, Malaicha handled an average of 20,000 to 30,000 orders a month. That figure has since risen to 75,000, as people normally suspicious of apps were forced out of their comfort zone by the regulations. Apps like these should be encouraged to enable continuity during this dreadful pandemic. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And finally, online streaming services are booming amidst this pandemic. Just take a look at Netflix stock, because households around the world are now forced to stay at home and we all want something to do while we're there. Now, one company in Ethiopia is hoping to use this to their advantage and to break into this sector by creating and broadcasting original content from Africa. CGTN's Coletta Njohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Work in progress in the G Media studio in Addis Ababa, giving life to one of Ethiopia's famous folk tales. It is about Kaldi, a young goat herder who discovered coffee.
When you do animation, you only need a studio that people sit and work together, and you can tell a lot of stories that you can't really tell from with cameras and a camera crew. Like you can go back in time and do a historical story like the one that we are doing right now.
The company is hoping to put its animations online and tap into the growing demand across Africa for streaming services amid the coronavirus pandemic. Citizens in Ethiopia now have access to more affordable internet, with a telecommunication company here offering special packages to encourage them to stay at home. And now that means that more people are accessing international streaming sites. But there has been criticism over a lack of content for African audiences.
From what we see from the data is that Africa is a growing continent. There's a lot of movement in its economy, and a lot of people are moving towards using different services such as Netflix and so on. And that whole entire market, all of these Africans right now living in this continent would want to watch something that speaks to their language, their tradition and culture. So I think the opportunity is incredibly huge.
At least 9 international streaming providers have viewership in Africa. Showmax, Netflix and Google Play currently dominate the market. Experts say it will take a lot of investment for African companies to compete.
Initial overhead cost may be a little bit higher to purchase some of the equipment for editing and rendering and things like this. We have powerful machines that do that to kind of make our time more efficient, if you will. But you know, if you're able to successfully produce animations and you have the right capacity, you should be able to penetrate the market and break even on the investment, I would say, within 2 years or so. It shouldn't take long. It really depends on the overhead of the company.
But African companies like G Media are confident they can make their mark on the industry, as the COVID-19 crisis is set to continue for some time yet. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the hour. In East Africa, Kenya's finance ministry is proposing a fresh $500 million stimulus spending plan, and it's going to be funded, according to the finance minister, through a mix of reallocated expenditure and surplus funds from SOEs. The currency is over 5% weak against American dollars so far in the year. The rand it does continue to post incremental gains against the dollar. 18.265 was the position at 1711 GMT. Demand for South African debt is also relatively strong. The most recent auction saw bids that were 2.8 times higher than the $333 million worth of notes on offer. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The news continues on CGTN.